Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post. Woke companies paying lawyers millions to delete their DEI. Companies spent millions and millions of dollars promoting these ridiculous practices of discriminating against people. It's not legal. It was never legal. It was something a lot of companies were doing. It came in through human resources and through mass media, and companies got stuck doing this. Now there's really no mechanism to get rid of all of it. A lot of companies have started to get rid of it. Some companies have gotten rid of their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. They've laid off their diversity people. They've closed departments. Even companies as big as Microsoft getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion management. But as much as they created these departments to do diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's really no direct mechanism to flip a switch and get rid of all these people and change all of these policies all at once. So that leaves lawyers. So lawyers, research companies, PR companies, people have come into these companies and they're now starting to make millions of dollars working for big companies, trying to figure out how to get themselves out of these policies, remove links on their website, remove references to the word diversity, certainly references to the words diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not all the companies have gotten rid of all of these policies, but it's not like they can really legitimately do it easily overnight. It is absolutely ingrained in the operations in some of these companies, and some of the higher ups of these companies aren't even aware that they're doing this. And when I say this, I mean, of course, they're aware they have a diversity, equity, and inclusion program, but they don't know the extent of it. There are people in companies who are like middle management or lower level people who have gone ahead and done some of these things on their own, especially, for example, sponsorship of like LGBT pride parades, things like that. The head of the company isn't aware of exactly which pride parades in Indiana they're sponsoring. They don't know about stuff like that. They're working on other things. But they did create an environment where people could do this. People who wanted to push this agenda slid in through human resources, got some incentive programs going where if you discriminate against people in a certain way, against certain races and certain skin colors and genders, then executives got bonuses, but now they have to fix all of this. And it's really expensive and it's a complete mess. From the New York Times, a new business on Wall Street defending against DEI backlash. Companies are conducting vulnerability assessments, compiling research reports, and writing plans for what to do if their diversity efforts come under attack. And law firms are getting contracted. Law firms mobilized to respond to anti-DEI backlash. With employers left wondering if their affinity group or hiring initiative will get them dragged into court, law firms are bulking up their offerings to clients worried about litigation risk. Which is to say they're creating special departments at corporate law firms where they can bill companies for advising them on how to fix their exposure to all these diversity things they've been doing. Because they're going to get sued. Changing things now with a company will stop future lawsuits, but there are lawsuits they're still going to get from what they've done to people and how they've discriminated against people that they just can't take back. And in Inc. magazine, they wonder, does changing the language of DEI protect companies? No, it doesn't protect companies. It's not what you call it. It's what you actually do. Many executives have changed or are changing their language around DEI efforts. But one expert says these changes aren't likely to provide any legal protection. Well, you can't just change the name, but still do illegal things. It's common sense, and common sense works almost everywhere. And from Bloomberg, companies are dropping the D or E from DEI to avoid criticism. In a new survey, the majority of executives said terminology has been altered. It's unclear how much operations of the programs are changing. Now, if you have a company of any size, whether it's 5 people or especially if it's 1,500 people or 15,000 people, you can't just change things immediately overnight, because if you do, as a result of that change, you now have to make that the highest priority. Drop everything you're doing. We're now doing this. Especially in these really large companies where people at different levels don't even know what they've done and what they've been doing. So the first move is change terminology. Drop the D from diversity, equity, and inclusion. Drop the E from diversity, equity, and inclusion. That stops at least the growth of whatever this is and keeps it limited to essentially what they've kind of already done. Pulling it out or reducing it from that point is kind of like having another medical procedure after you've taken emergency action. But they wouldn't change the names of things if they were really going to keep these discriminatory programs. They're trying to be less of a target, which is great, and also to send a message: if you believe in all of this, if you're part of all of this, we're not going to be supporting it, so you better stop working on this. From the New York Times, somebody you may not have ever heard of has managed to scare virtually all of corporate America, and Wall Street is creating a new cottage industry around the fear. Robbie Starbuck, a former music television director, has turned his social media account into a weapon against corporate DEI. He's whipped up a frenzy threatening boycotts and flooding companies with negative media mentions over their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Tractor Supply pared back from its DEI initiative in June after Starbuck tweeted that it was time to expose the home improvement chain. John Deere followed suit in July and Harley-Davidson in August, both times following pressure from Starbuck. Now Wall Street law firms and communications outfits are building businesses around preparing companies for a Starbuck offense. For any company of any size now that has done anything with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and pretty much all of them have done at least something with it, they need this now. There's no excuse for them to not pay these lawyers an absolute fortune to figure out how much liability they have and to try to get them out of the DEI business at their company. Even when they pay these law firms millions of dollars for a service like this, it's much less than the embarrassment if they get caught and they haven't at least started to address the problem. It can ruin the career of executives at these companies, which hopefully does happen because whoever was part of this should be ruined. The methods these companies are using mirror how they would prepare for a cybersecurity attack: conducting vulnerability assessments, compiling research reports, and writing plans for what to do if Starbucks comes calling. The furious scrutiny gets at the heart of a question facing corporate America. After many companies adopted and heralded their efforts to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion, often citing studies showing benefits for business, which are all fake studies, many of them produced by McKinsey & Company, a consultancy that sells those services to the same company. And if you don't follow this closely, you wouldn't even know. I'm sure there are many people that are citing McKinsey's research and reports saying how diversity, equity, and inclusion is so great for business and really builds your bottom line, makes you so profitable. Many of those people promoting these things have no idea that McKinsey & Company is actually selling the same services that they're saying are great services. It's really ridiculous. But now companies are grappling with how to handle a backlash when both customers and executives are split over the policies. Their investors are not in agreement either. The New York City Comptroller's Office oversees the powerful New York State Employees Pension Fund and is trying to threaten lawsuits if executives concede too much to Robbie Starbuck and people telling them to stop it with the illegal diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Although other investors are also saying, hey, look, do not do these illegal programs. Cut it out with these programs already. What they ought to be doing is just following the law. And the law is very clear that you can't discriminate against people based on their gender, their sexual preferences, their race, none of that stuff. You've got to hire people based on merit and give them opportunities based only on merit. Quote, as a company, you might be between a rock and a hard place, said Kai Liegefeld, who chairs the corporate defense practice at the law firm Sidney Austin. Quote, you have an anti-DEI activist clashing with a DEI activist. And you're just basically a battleground for the culture wars that are playing out in corporate America. Corporate America's break the glass planning for a Starbucks attack comes as it faces a surging blowback to the DEI practices it rushed to implement in 2020. The Supreme Court ruling ending affirmative action in U.S. schools last year opened up companies to litigation over DEI programs. Customer revolts over diversity issues like the boycott of Anheuser-Busch. Customer revolts over diversity issues like the boycott of Bud Light lost the company $1 billion in sales, but it lost them much, much more in market position. Bud Light is no longer the number one beer in the industry. They've also been removed from many taps in many bars and restaurants. They have permanently damaged that Bud Light brand and they are never getting that business back. Starbuck is, quote, in a position where he can ride this wave, Jason Schwartz, an employment lawyer at the law firm Gibson Dunn, said. He added that he's had conversations with about 50 major companies about restructuring their diversity programs or communicating about them differently in order to avoid lawsuits, but few clients have aimed to scrap these efforts entirely. The Starbucks defense playbook starts with stealth mode. Executives are telling employees not to look at Starbucks' profile on LinkedIn, which could attract his attention. Starbuck told the New York Times an onslaught of Lowe's employees looking at his profile initially drew his attention to the home goods retailer. It later became one of his targets. Communications and consulting firms trawl through any content that companies have on their website, annual report, or elsewhere that might expose them to a potential attack from Starbuck. Words like diversity and any public association with the Human Rights Campaign, or HRC, an LGBT advocacy group, are a particular red flag. So they have communications firms and consulting firms going through their websites, pointing out where they need to delete and change their information so they don't get in trouble with anti-woke lawsuits. Those considering dialing back some DEI initiatives are also talking with unions, suppliers, and others to understand the extent of potential financial repercussions. For example, will their liberal customers or suppliers boycott? Will their employees revolt? For many, these conversations started prior to Starbucks campaigns. Starbuck himself seems amused at the effort. Quote, if these companies really want to know how to be in a position where they can sort of be corporately neutral and stay away from the ire of conservative consumers, feel free to just drop me a line, he says. Quote, you don't have to pay $1 million to a terrible consulting firm. He says many attempts to escape his attention, like deleting language from websites, are fruitless. He went on to say, quote, we have enough material, honestly, to go on for years if necessary. However companies ultimately handle their response to the pushback over DEI, it is causing a moment of reckoning within corporate offices. An examination of DEI efforts forces executives to consider whether they followed through on promises they've made several years ago. And then the next question is whether they still want to. If executives are, quote, learning for the first time about some various initiatives somewhere within the company, that's the first issue, said Brian Bartlett, a strategist at a communications firm. The second is if those initiatives are not in line with the company priorities. That is problematic, he said, because the companies are big enough that they have things going on that they're not even aware of at the highest levels. Some executives say that changing how they talk or write about their DEI efforts, the most common remedy, does not change the work that is going on behind the scenes. But for diversity experts, that maneuver naturally gives rise to different concerns. How do you hold your leadership accountable to something that's not written? And are companies at risk of simply listening to the whims of those provoking the day's online outrage? If the plans are not written, it's not going to go forward. They may still continue to discriminate and tolerate some of those things. The problem is there's always going to be a paper trail. There's always going to be someone who is told by someone else, hey, we can't hire people like this because we're supposed to discriminate against those people with those skin colors and not these people of those races. And this sexual preference is really what we're looking to do. At companies, it's not manageable if it's not a written policy, which means it's not going to go on. It may take a year to die out. It may take 2 years to die out, but it's going to die out. Starbucks' audience is particular. Communications firm FGS Global found in its internal research that 17% of the news-attentive Americans it polled over age 45 have heard of Starbucks, while 38% of those under 45 have. It is also not clear how many of his 670,000 followers on Twitter and 350,000 Instagram followers are actually bots. Yes, I still sometimes call X Twitter. Quote, this very small minority of individuals have this outsized voice, Porter Braswell says, the founder of 2045 Studio, a membership network of professionals of color. Quote, it's forced all of us in the industry to start to have way more of a conviction around the importance of working together so that we talk more about what's actually happening on the front lines. While not every follower of Robbie Starbuck or anyone who watches my YouTube channel is absolutely out there talking about this, talking about it on social media, telling friends about it, writing articles about it, doing videos about it, not everyone is active But people are aware of it, and the mood of the country is the same mood as the Bud Light issue. We don't want this. And you need to stop trying to force it on us and our children. You don't need 100% of an audience to be that active about it. Just there are people that are interested, they're aware, and we don't want this discriminatory nonsense in our country. And we certainly don't want children exposed to it. For the cottage industry advising companies, any swing back in the pendulum may simply mean more fees and PowerPoint presentations. What that means for executives behind the scenes is up to them. And from this article specifically talking about law firms aggressively going into this business, they say this: Blum, that's Edward Blum, and Robbie Starbuck are among the best known players in the anti-DEI arena, but there are many lesser known individuals and groups undertaking similar efforts, according to Jason Schwartz, co-chair of the Labor and Employment Group at Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. Quote, those groups have been highly organized and very effective so far in their litigation, but I also think that the story has yet to be written. The law is still very much in flux. They filed their early cases in jurisdictions where they thought they would be more successful. This law is going to develop in courts throughout the country, and so I think it's important for folks not to overreact to it. And that's a lawyer talking. I've hired several lawyers for different business-related things in life. I also used to share office space with lawyers. Great guys. People used to think I was a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. But I can tell you when lawyers are trying to get a lot of billing. I can tell you when they're trying to pad their billing. These are law firms that know if they can kind of stretch this out for a while, they're going to have sources of revenue coming in, millions upon millions of dollars, because these companies have walked themselves into a terrible situation where they've committed multiple actionable acts of discrimination against people based on their skin color in violation of their civil rights. They should not have done that. They can't just blame it on George Floyd. That is not a legal defense. Each and every one of these big companies over time will be forced to pay in a lawsuit. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.